And on behalf of the Rhode Island unit of Irish Northern Aid, I'd like to welcome you to our annual commemoration of the 1916 Easter Rising. We've remembered this important part of Irish history every year since 1981. The last 2 years, the commemoration was held virtually, but tonight we're happy to be back in person. I was thinking it's hard to say something good about COVID, but due to our technology team, we've learned Zoom. And so now we have the best of both worlds tonight. We've got our group here in person, and we've got friends in Zoom world, and I think we're even in the north of Ireland, maybe? Yes. Yes. Trisha's in Derry. Hi, she's waving. And she's listening in from the 6 counties, from Derry. At our events, we always, and it has been since 1981, start with a moment of silence in memory of those who have given their lives in the cause of Irish freedom. At the Easter Rising, my mind immediately goes to the 16 men who within just 3 weeks of the surrender were executed by the British. Their names are pretty familiar to some of us. Eamon Kant, Thomas Clark, James Connolly, Sean McDermott, Thomas McDonough, Patrick Pierce, Joseph Plunkett, Roger Casement, Con Colbert, Edward Daly, Sean Houston, Thomas Kent, John McBride, Michael Mallon, Michael O'Halloran, and Willie Pierce. But tonight, let's also remember the others, the people that I know I personally, in the past commemorations, didn't really think about that much. The additional 66 members of the rebel forces and the 260 civilians who also lost their lives. Tragically, there were 40 children under 17 years old counted among the dead. Now, let's have a moment of silence. Thanks. No commemoration of Irish freedom fighters would be complete without music, of course. Tonight, we're happy and lucky to have Sean Connell with us, and he's going to start us off with the Foggy Dew.
I don't know how it goes. Down the glen one Easter morn, the city fair o'ernight. Their armored lines of marching men, the squadrons they passed me by. No fighting on nor battle drum, sound its dread tattoo. The Angelus bell, the levee swell, but it rang out in the foggy dew. Like cloudy high over Dublin town, we hung out the flag wall, with banners that died even Irish sky, and it stood on a silver band. From the flames and royal mead, strong men came hurrying through, while the tiny guns with their long-range guns, they sailed might be free. And the lonely graves are like soulless waves at the shores of the great North Sea. And had they died by Pierce's side, the fought with break our road, their names would keep the Fenian sea in the shroud of the foggy dew. But the bravest fell and the requiem fell, I'm on the kneeling and singing for those that had died on that Easter tide in the springtime of the year. And the world did gaze in deep amaze, as fearless men but few, who bore their fight so that freedom's light would shine to the foggy dew. Ah, back to the glen where they rode again, my heart breathed with sword. But I parted them with a valiant young man I never will see no more. But to and fro in my dreams I will go, I kneel and I pray for you. Oh, slavery has fled, for the glorious dead when you fell in the foggy dew. Oh, slavery had fled, oh, the glorious dead, when he fell in the foggy dew.
Thanks, Sean. And now Anne McCarthy will remind us of the important contributions that women have played in the fight for Irish unity. Here's Anne with Extraordinary Women of Ireland.
Thank you, Davis. You're welcome. Okay, dress suitably in short skirts and strong boots, leave jewels in the bank, and buy a revolver. This was a piece of advice given by Countess Markovich to her followers. And she was just one of the many incredible women who were deeply involved in the Irish history of the time. And they certainly were involved in the Rising, but there was an awful lot going on in Ireland at this point in time. There was, and I'm not going to attempt to say the Irish pronunciation, but there was a group called the Daughters of Erin, or translated into the Daughters of Erin, and it was named Inglehee, never mind. But anyway, what they wanted, their goal was complete independence for Ireland and revival of interest in Irish culture, customs, etc. This period at the turn of the century was known as the Gaelic Revival. Now, as I mentioned, Countess Markovich was just one of the many women who were involved in the activities of the time. Now, she, Countess Markovich, was born in Lissadell, County Sligo, and she came from a fairly well-to-do family. And she was introduced to Dublin and London society. So in 1898, she was over in Paris and she met a penniless Polish count, hence the different surname. They returned to Ireland in 1903, but she separated from her husband and became increasingly interested in nationalism and social issues. She joined Ingleby, not Erin, in 1907, but she later joined Commemoration, which translate Irish Workers Union, Irish Women's Council, forgive me. There was a terrible union episode called the Lockout of 1913, where workers were literally locked out of their places of employment. And I'm not talking, big money jobs. These were ordinary run-of-the-mill people who worked in factories, people who who swept the streets, and they were locked out. And it started in August of 1913, and it went on until January 1914. It was horrible. People were starving. The Irish Citizen Army was formed to protect the workers. Now, she was the second in command, moving on to the Rising. She was the second in command at Stephen's Green. And she was sentenced to death. Obviously, this was a very short Rising. And she was sentenced to death, but her sentence was commuted to life in prison because she was a woman. She was held in Aylesbury Jail in England until June 1917. Now, when she was in jail, she was elected president of Commemoration. And she was one of the original members, but the group was actually founded by Maud Gonne McBride. But Countess Markovich was the first female elected to the House of Commons in 1918. But she did not take her seat. In 1990 to 1921, she served as Minister for Labor in the First Dáil, but spent most of the time in prison. She was a strong opponent of the treaty. But she did take part in the fighting during the Civil War, and she also helped to indicate the Republican newspaper while she was in Glasgow. She also went on fundraising trips in the US. Okay, she joined in 1926. She joined Fianna Fáil at its founding, but gave up her position in Commemoration to do so. She was elected to the Dáil again in 1927, but she died before Fianna Fáil entered the government. Now, this lady arrived at her first Ingleby meeting in an evening gown. She offered to sell a diamond brooch in order to raise money to support the people that were locked out. Many thought she was a spy. And she also asked women, after a while, she was accepted, of course, but she asked women not to join franchises that did not include total freedom for the nation. Now, her involvement in nationalism caused her to lose everything she had. Her position in society, her family, her friends. She just gave it all for nationalism. Now, one of her close associates was Maud Gonne McBride, who was the daughter, she was also from a fairly well-to-do family. And the thing that kind of fascinated me about her, and I first heard about her when I went to the Yates School in Sligo a long time ago. But W.B. Yeats, the poet, was madly in love with her. He proposed to her 4 times, and she turned him down because he was not radical enough for her. And I just left, hey. But anyway, but she became really financially independent after her father's death, and it was at that point she became really active in Irish affairs. She was one of the founders of the Daughters of Erin group in 1900, and it was a catalyst for Irish women who were involved in the fight for Irish freedom. Now, she married John McBride in 1903. They had one son, Sean, who later went on to become one of the founders of Amnesty International. And, but John, her husband, was executed in the Rising in 1916. She was imprisoned in Holloway Prison, this is still Maud now, in 1918, and she was imprisoned for alleged involvement in the quote-unquote German plot. This is just basically where the Brits thought that Ireland's, the Republicans were plotting with Germany. So that was not the case. She had other things on her mind. She also publicized atrocities committed by the Black and Tans during the War of Independence. Now, I want to take a little sidetrack here. I learned a lot doing the research for this. So basically, you can have the activism at the turn of the century. Then this evolved into the actual uprising. Then after the uprising, then you had the War of Independence. Then the Civil War came about between the treaty and the anti-treaty forces. Now, I know we had a wonderful talk a couple of weeks ago from Tim Hoyt, and maybe I wasn't paying attention, but at any rate, the treaty, what was this treaty? What was the big deal with the treaty? The big deal was, after negotiations went on in London, what they came out with, and this was where Michael Collins got into hot water with the Republicans. One of the concessions of the treaty was that, or one of the requirements of the treaty was that the members of the Dáil, or the Parliament, if you will, were required, or would have been required, to sign an oath of allegiance to the king. And they would also be, the Dublin government would be responsible for the 32 counties. They didn't want that. This was another issue. And so anyway, it kind of, I'm not giving a very good explanation, just a very basic explanation. And so, I mean, but the Civil War just went on and on and on. And it actually started in, let's see, June of 1922, when the forecourts of Dublin was fired up. So, and then they were off and running. So, anyway, Maud died in 1953 at the age of 86. Now, and I'm not gonna, all right, Grace Gifford, I think we've all heard the lovely song Grace. Grace Gifford came from a very nationalistic family, and she was the second youngest of 12 kids, but she was a talented artist, and she studied at the Metropolitan School of Art in Dublin, and later at the Slade Institute in London. When she returned to Dublin, she became a caricaturist, and she contributed to a publication called the Irish Review, which was edited by Joseph Mary Plunkett. The courtship began, and he proposed in December. He was seriously ill with tuberculosis. But still in all, he was a member of the military council that planned the rising. Now, in early April of 1916, Grace converted to Catholicism in order to marry Joseph. So when he was sentenced to death, he sought permission to marry. They were given the permission, but the ceremony took place in the Catholic chapel in the presence of British soldiers. Now, the event was underscored by the possibility that Grace was pregnant. If she was, she suffered a miscarriage after his execution. Now, but you know, good news, bad news kind of thing. The story of the Plunkett marriage, she actually was able to spend literally 10 minutes with her husband before he was taken out to be executed. She was in the prison. She was in the prison for the, you know, waiting for permission to go in and get married, and she was kept waiting from about 11 p.m. until about 2 a.m. And it was shortly after that that she was able to see Joseph. And those of you who've been to Ireland know that in the spring and the summer, they're very long days. The sun comes up at about 3 in the morning. So they kept her waiting until it was almost time for his execution. And that's what happened. So, but the marriage was seen as a contributing factor in turning the tide of public opinion to one of sympathy. She became a public figure after this, and she was a member of the Sinn Féin Executive Committee. She continued to work as an artist, and she used her skills during a war of independence. And she was arrested in 1923 and imprisoned in Kilmainham until August of 23. So in her later years, Grace pursued a career as an artist and never remarried. There was also a great public outcry after the 15 men were executed. And this kind of helped turn the tide a little bit. But the Gifford Plunkett marriage was really significant. Now, let's have a quick look at the typist with a Webley. Now, this lady, Winnie Carney McBride, she was a secretary. She was born in Bangor County Down, and she was trained as a secretary and as a shorthand typist. And she joined the Gaelic League and began learning Irish. And she also involved herself in the suffrage and socialist movements. She became secretary to the Irish Textile Workers Union and became a close friend and personal secretary to James Connolly. He invited her to Dublin once things started happening. Now, during her time with James Connolly, she also trained in the use of a rifle. She became a crack shot. Keep it in mind, it doesn't, becoming a good marksperson, doesn't involve a lot of physical strength, just eye-hand coordination is the thing. A lot of women with good shots. And she was exceptionally good because she got this name, she developed this name for herself. She didn't do it. This is what she was called. Typist with a Webley. And she was just an amazing woman. Now, her activities involved labor and socialist activities. She was definitely anti-treaty during the Civil War. And then she married a George McBride, no relation to Sean, and in 1928. She died in November 1943. All right, Kathleen Clark. Kathleen Clark was born in Limerick to a nationalist family. She wanted to be independent, and she set up her own dressmaking business that she ran until she went to the US in 1901. There she met and married Tom Clark, who had been in prison with her father. So there was about a 20-year age difference. And, you know, her family was not, they were not impressed. Now, Tom was also one of the leaders of the 1916 Rising, who was executed along with Kathleen's brother Ned. She was a founding member of Commemoration and was one of the main activists in its central branch. She did not take actual part in the Rising or active part in the Rising because she had been selected by the Irish Republican Brotherhood to be told of all the decisions of the Supreme Council. And she was also entrusted with the name of key men throughout the country. Now, her role was to coordinate distribution of support for families of activists, should the fighting last for several months. And then she became a key organizer in the distribution of aid to prisoners' dependents. She was also an active fundraiser, and she sheltered men and women on the run. And the other interesting thing about her is she was the first female Lord Mayor of Dublin. She served in that position from 1939 to 1943. And then in the 40s, she served on numerous hospital boards. Okay, now this will be the last one. Elizabeth O'Farrell. She is remembered in two ways. She was the woman Patrick Pearse selected to carry his message to open peace negotiations for secession, ceasing hostilities at the end of Easter week. And also probably an act of willful amnesia. In an act of willful amnesia, she was airbrushed from a picture of Pearse delivering surrender documents to General Lowe. Thus, she's remembered for being forgotten. So she was a trained midwife, and she and her best friend Julia Brennan joined Commemoration, and she was which was an auxiliary of Irish volunteers. She supported during the 1913 lockout and worked with Countess Markovich, who introduced she and her friend Julia Brennan to James Conley as someone they could trust at the start of Easter week. She was a dispatch driver, and she carried messages not only through Dublin, but also out to the outlying districts, the outlying areas. And, you know, they were snipers. But this was a very important role that women played. They were couriers, I read about one group of women, young mothers, who would be taking their babies out for a stroll, but they would conceal weapons and whatnot in the carriages, and they were left alone, pretty much. I guess the British didn't think that they would stoop to anything like that, but anyway. But excuse me. Okay, all right, I'm gonna. All right, I have more stuff here. I'm obviously not gonna read it, go through it all, because I'd be here until 4th of July, and none of us want that. Okay, but I do want to leave you with a quote, which I discovered when I was doing some of my research. But this is a quote from a more contemporary activist. And quote, "We were born into an unjust system. We are not prepared to grow old in it." Bernadette Devlin McAllister. Bernadette Devlin, quote Bernadette Devlin. And thank you very much for your very kind attention. It's so, I would urge you to read some of this stuff. It's fascinating what these women went through.
Thanks, Ann. Welcome, Davis. John, how about Grace? Let's hear about one of those women.
As we gather in the chapel here in old Lane Jail, think about these last few weeks. Oh, will they say we failed from our school days? They had told us we must yearn for liberty. All I want in this dark place is to have you here with me. So Grace, just hold me in your arms and let this moment linger. You'll take me out at dawn and I will die. With all my love I place this wedding ring upon your finger. There won't be time to share our love, so we must say goodbye. I don't have for you, my love, to ever understand the love I have for these brave men, my love for this dear land. But when Padre called me to his side down in GPO, I loved so much that I could see the blood upon the road. So Grace, just hold me in your arms and let this moment linger. And take me out at dawn and I will die. With all my love I place this wedding ring upon your finger. There won't be time to share our love, for we must say goodbye. As the dawn is breaking, my heart is breaking too. On this May morn as I walk I could see his blood upon the rose. So Grace, just hold me in your arms and let this moment linger. Take me out at dawn and I will die. With all my love I place this wedding ring on your finger. No, there won't be time to share our love, for we must say goodbye. Won't be time to share our love, for we must say goodbye.
And now, also since 1981, we're going to have a reading of the proclamation by our own Tom Kelly.
Public na heaven, the provisional government of the Irish Republic, the people of Ireland. Irishmen and Irish women in the cause of God and of the dead generations from which they received their old tradition of nation. Ireland towards some of her children to our flag and strikes for her freedom. Having organized and trained her manhood to her secret revolutionary organization, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and to her open military organizations, the Irish Volunteers of the Irish Citizen Army, patiently perfected her discipline, having resolutely waited for the right moment to reveal itself. She now seizes that moment and, supported by her exiled children in America and by gallant allies in Europe, but relying on the first on her own strength, she strikes in full confidence of victory. We declare the pure right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies to be sovereign and indefeasible. The long usurpation of that right by a foreign government and people and government has not extinguished the right, nor can it ever be extinguished, except by the destruction of the Irish people. In every generation, the Irish people have accepted their rights to national freedom and sovereignty. 6 times during the past 300 years, they have accepted it in arms. Standing on that fundamental right and again accepted it in arms in the face of the world, we hereby proclaim the Irish Republic as a sovereign independent state. We pledge our lives and the lives of our comrades in arms to the cause of its freedom, of its welfare, and of its exaltation among the nations. The Irish Republic is entitled to and hereby proclaims the allegiance of every Irish man and Irish woman. The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights, and equal opportunities to all its citizens, and declares its resolve to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation and of all its parts, cherishing all the children of the nation equally and oblivious of the differences carefully fostered by an alien government which have divided the minority and the majority in the past. Until our arms have brought the opportune moment for the establishment of a permanent national government, representative of the whole people of Ireland, and elected by the suffrages of all our men and women, the provisional government hereby constitutes will administer the civil and military affairs of the Republic in trust for the people. We place the cause of the Irish Republic under the protection of the Most High God, whose blessing we invoke upon our arms. We pray that no one who serves that cause will dishonor it by cowardice, inhumanity, or rape. In this supreme hour, the Irish nation must, by its valor and discipline, and by the readiness of its children, to sacrifice themselves to the common good, prove itself worthy of the august destiny to which it is called. Signed on behalf of the Provisional Government, Thomas J. Clark, Sean McDearland, Thomas McDonough, Patrick H. Pierce, Eamon Kent, James Connolly, and Joseph Plunkett.
And if you'll notice, the drafters of the proclamation did not forget the women. They were mentioned right in there. Ann mentioned in her talk that Professor Tim Hoyt gave a lecture a couple of weeks ago. And just to want to remind everybody that since 1916, the 1916 committee has been having every month a lecture. And it started out, the lectures were about the rising, but it's kind of evolved into topics of interest. People have talked about the famine, we've talked about 1916, we've talked about emigration, the treatment that the Irish people received when they got to the United States, and the whole no Irish need apply and all that. But of course, the Irish aren't the only people who have been mistreated. And a couple of months ago, Mary Beth Lynch and Marie McGee gave a talk on the relationship between Daniel O'Connell and Frederick Douglass, Black American and abolitionist, and how he saw so many similarities between the struggle of the Blacks in the United States and the struggle of the Irish trying to free themselves from Britain's rule. And that's carried over, you know, for a long time. And in 1990 or 91, yeah, 1990, an Irish songwriter Irish American songwriter in New York heard a speech by Nelson Mandela. It was given at Yankee Stadium. I wouldn't have gone, but Dan Hannon did. And it made him think that, you know, if Nelson Mandela can get out of prison after all those years, why can't the Irish maybe get freedom from England? And he wrote a song. And now we're going to hear it from Sean.
They call it legend.
The legend.
Some
sorry.
people call it Mandela.
Yeah.
Went to see a legend just the other night at the Yankee Stadium underneath the light. I heard a man there speaking after years and years in jail. David was Mandela, came to tell his tale. Crowd gathered around him, then the silence fell as he spoke about our years in his South African cell. Though he was free, his heart was feeling pain. His country and his people, part of that shame. He said we hope he'd join him and walk down freedom's path. Oh, they would be hard years, yeah, but they would be the last. Join hands together so we could be as one. And then take to the cause so the battle could be won. Home to bed that evening, I had a dream. Standing in the pouring rain in an Irish field of green. All around the headstones of the martyrs of our past. There in silence, they spoke to me at last. Kevin Barry is my name. tortured in a cell. One of the names of my comrades, on this I would not tell. And I am Padre Pierce, shot down by the foe. Read the proclamation on the steps of the GPO. James Conley is my name. Working people are my life. They shot me down into Maynham jail without sorrow, without strife. I am Roger Casement, I was shot in London town, bringing German rifles to the lonely Bannerstrand. The last voice that I heard says, my name is Bobby Sands. Sweet to hear Magdalena's words still ringing through our land. I want to hear them in Belfast and in Derry and Tyrone. Maybe the British soldiers know it's time for them to go home. Woke up in the morning, I remember them all. And who would have believed that they knocked down the Berlin Wall? And I said, Mandela, could this really be? Maybe we'll see Ireland united and free. Maybe we'll see Ireland united and free.
Very nice, Sean. First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming. It's good to be back in person, isn't it? And thanks especially to Ann, Tom, and Sean. And of course, just a couple of announcements before we break up for the night. Tom Kelly has Irish Northern Aid membership cards. So if you'd like to renew your membership or join for the first time, see Tom, still $10 a year. The next lecture sponsored by the 1916 committee will be Friday, April 29th at the Cayley Club. And Paul Caranci will talk about a man who, it was another miscarriage of justice, John Gordon in Rhode Island. So a lot of us have heard a little bit about him. Maybe you can find out a lot more. This isn't what?
Music in the pub after?
Music in the pub after? Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, guess who it's gonna be?
And there'll be a raffle too.
And the raffle. And Easter Rising Commemoration is not the only annual event that Irish Northern Aid has. We also have an annual hunger strike memorial. So that'll be sometime in May. You'll be hearing about that. And this Thursday, right here at Patrick's, I guess at 7, there'll be a meeting of the 1916 committee. And we're going to talk about upcoming events, and it's going to be an important meeting because we've got a monument to build. Good progress made on the hunger strike monument that is to be installed at the famine memorial. I guess I wasn't at the meeting, but similar to the monument that was erected in 2016 in the 100th anniversary of the 1916 uprising, and this will be a similar monument to the 10 brave men who died on hunger strike in 1981. So we have our work cut out for us on that. We have some serious fundraising to get done. So if you have any ideas, you want to, get them on email, come to a meeting, let us know, because we're gonna have to raise the money for that. And with that, we'll close. Thank you very much. Happy.